So recently, in many major cities, there was a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign put out there by one of the dating apps. We won't give them the credit of their name being invoked in such a sacred space. But one of these dating apps launched a multi-million-dollar campaign. And the main advert in it was a gigantic poster in subway stations that said, "Thou shalt not become a nun." Interesting. Another one of their major campaigns said, taking a vow of celibacy is not the solution. Here's a question for you. Why would they be doing that? You know, they've ruled the world for a long time, these apps, these narratives, that in your pocket is a device that will lead to your sexual satisfaction, your perfect, authentic self-expression, your ideal partnership, and yet they don't. We all know one person who met on a dating app and a couple dozen people who felt destroyed by the damn thing. And I mean that literally, the damn thing. Only 50% of people who have used dating apps report a positive experience overall. So some of them, yes, and I give credit where credit due. I do know people who met their spouses, great relationships through dating apps. Even a broken clock can be right a couple times a day. Thank God for the grace given to imperfect machines. But these machines have torn through the world, have fundamentally changed the arrangement of courtship, dating, marriage, family, children, societal coherence has all been denigrated by these things, and they are starting to get a little off-brand. They're not as calculated as they used to be. I can see their angles. They recognize that people know this doesn't work, that there are better options out there, free options out there, and that even if people cannot find the one using their magic little app, people actually have all sorts of ways to find meaningful human connection. And one of the ways that people who are unmarried have found meaningful human connection is through intentional community with other people seeking a high ideal that can cohere them in their life together and help them feel less alone and be more connected and find a meaningful life. And one of the ways that women did this for all of history in the West was joining a nunnery. And it's almost like these apps are starting to realize that the nunnery might actually offer more than the app. I'll tell you which one's cheaper. I'll tell you which one's guaranteed to put you face to face with someone. I'll tell you which one's not trying to extract all of your money forever, although we can argue about nunneries. You know, we can argue it, but like, it's not a worse option than the apps. And the apps are beginning to know, and they're beginning to recognize that their competition won't be the other apps, it will be the actual places people have found meaningful connection for all of Western history. And so they're trying to go on the offensive, but in doing so, we're starting to see that they are a little shaky. Now, I will admit, when it comes to the secular world we live in, I feel I have to start with a confession that I really underestimated this culture's ability to hijack our imagination. I'd say for the first decade of my life as a pastor in this congregation, I greatly underestimated how effective these tools would be, especially digital technology, at shaping the very way we see the world. And today I'm going to show you that I learned from those mistakes. This world is suicidal. This present culture that we're living in, when I say world, I don't mean Earth. Earth is beautiful and abundant. I mean the present cultural realities, the machine that we are up against is suicidal. It takes everything apart. In 1948, 80 almost years ago, Jacques Ellul, who was a philosopher and a sociologist and a theologian, Jacques Ellul in 1948 wrote that the will of the world, the system, is always a will to death, a will to suicide. We must not accept this suicide. and we must so act that it cannot take place. The suicide that we are living in, which is beginning to manifest in death of people around us, neighbors and friends of friends and friends' children, this death is manifesting because we are living in a culture that is more sick than it has ever been. And I know I sound like some fundamentalist old school Baptist preacher, and I'm not. I'm a modern Baptist preacher who's a little fundamentalist. No, I'm not fundamentalist. I believe in the fundamentals. Words break down, but I'm not coming after the culture like the church is the best and the culture is the worst. I'm just ready to put the culture in the spotlight for a sermon. We live in a culture of relativism. You don't need to know philosophy or spend too much time thinking about it, but if you want to, it's a good word to think about. Relativism. Everything has become relative to every other thing. We don't have a central truth that we judge other truth facts based off. All things are equally true or untrue depending on how all people feel about them. Maybe that's fine, maybe that's bad, but it's different. We don't have a clear good and evil. There was a time where in a society we could name that some things were evil. They were against human flourishing. They took things apart, and that other things were good. They were true. They led to human flourishing. And sometimes we labeled the wrong things bad, and sometimes we labeled the right things bad and the wrong things good. So we weren't perfect in our judgments. But we had some place to begin. And whether you agree or disagree with this relativistic moment we're in, where everything is relative to everything else and nothing is truly better or worse and nothing is truly good or evil, it does lead to a certain incoherence. For things to cohere, they must be close to one another. They must be able to find one another. Coherence is the idea of a grouping of things that helps us find it. You know, you could picture like a mountain. A mountain coheres the people around it, but a desert is incoherent. There is no centralized place. You could go infinitely in every direction, and you could end up all alone. If you move towards a mountain, you will find coherence because you will meet others moving to that one lifted up place that is in opposition to every open, barren place. Is this making sense about relativism as just kind of a framework? So then to live in a culture that gives itself over to relativism is to live in a culture that says, hey, everybody, go wherever you want in the desert. The whole desert is yours individually. Go find your favorite desert place. And then it is for all of us to die alone in the wilderness. It manifests in death, both physical death and the death of the soul, the death of the psyche, the death of our own ability to perceive our own lives and understand that they are good. This is what we have been losing. Now, historically, Western society, which most of us will be inheritors of some version of Western society from Europe and Britain and all that area over here to Turtle Island, and most of us would have been raised in a sort of Western framework, which means that the majority of our parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents were Christian people. And we may agree or disagree with the kind of idea of Christianity as a cultural norm in a society. But what we have to acknowledge is that whatever your opinion of a society that is defaulting to Christianity, you do have to acknowledge that it worked. It worked. For a very long time, societies and families and communities cohered within the language of Christianity. They had children and married those children off to other people who would have children and continue to keep their society alive. They had industry and farming and communities. They had worship rhythms together. They sustained towns and villages for generations on generations. And now, in the roughly 80 years since World War II and the real birth of secularism, we have already begun to lose our social cohesion. We are beginning to see a decline in birth rates. We are seeing the effects of this sort of culture that we're living in and the way that it's manifesting in our culture. And at present, it's manifesting in extremely high rates of self-harm and suicide. You can read the American CDC reports. You can do some of your own digging. I didn't want to bring a whole bunch of facts and data points into this, but it's self-evident that the culture we're living in, whatever our diagnosis of why it's happening, it is extremely self-evident that this time is a time that is leading people to death. We judged and rejected the church as a society. We judged and rejected Christianity as a default narrative. Maybe you think that's good. Maybe you think that's bad. Either way, you're allowed to have your opinion. But I do think it's worth saying that if we are going to judge and criticize the church and Christian religion as something that needs to be critiqued, I do feel it's only fair to share some of that criticism and critique with the other institutions and systems that make up the culture we live in. Before I go any further, does that seem fair? Just by nodding of heads, I won't make you raise. Does it seem fair to say if we're going to criticize the church with an incredibly sharp critique, that we also should be allowed to criticize the other institutions we participate in and belong into? I see enough nods to go ahead. Okay. So let's offer just a bit of a critical eye. Here's the challenge. There's too many new houses of worship and too many new religions for me to go on blast for all of them. So I'm just going to let you shout it out. I'm going to name some of the ones I've got here. Just shout it out, and I'll just rant for honestly 60 seconds or less. I'm going to keep it smooth, keep it moving. Just to put a bit of an eye on this. So shout it out, whichever ones you want. We've got entertainment, we've got technology, we've got economy, we've got sports, we've got politics, we've got hobbies. What should we look at? Housing. I don't know housing. We can all acknowledge housing is broken. Let's tie housing to economy, because it seems like the economy is a big part of the housing crisis. Hey, how come all these businesses we're not criticizing believe that they can make record profits every 3 months forever? Doesn't that seem a little unsustainable? That every organization in the world, every business working for the economy thinks it's going to make more money every quarter for all time, onward and ever, forever and ever, amen? Doesn't that seem like it would break the game at a certain point? This is the thing about the economy. I understand that we have to get jobs, and I understand that the Israelites lived in Babylon and they worked for the Babylonian machine. So we're not coming after individuals. But the idea that this economy, what is the economy? Does anyone know what the economy is? I keep being told that the economy will sort itself out. It sounds like a god. They're like, I don't know, Mammon will sort it out. Just trust, keep feeding it, and it will take care of us all. And now no one has a place to live. And those who do have a place to live are waiting for the economy to get so bloated that they can no longer afford the place they live in. What else? What else? Shout them out. Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Wellness culture. Wellness culture. Yeah, this idea that we all need to be improving all the time, that we need to be making sure that we are taking care of ourselves by buying the products that are advertised to us. Wellness culture almost feels like an inversion of the gospel. Whereas the gospel says, come as you are. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be well. This is a place for sick people to acknowledge that they're sick and to allow something transcendent to make them well. Wellness culture has become a gigantic pyramid scheme, a house of worship, devoted to lifting you up to Aphrodite or somebody up there. And the way that you can lift yourself up is by giving your money and giving your time and giving your attention to improving yourself bit by bit. Endless self-improvement of your body, your mind, your spirit, your perfect, authentic self, that once you're at the very top of wellness, you'll finally be happy and nobody's ever gotten there. What out? Shout a couple more out. Yeah. Yeah, the economy, the free market, and the invisible hand of the free market. Can we just acknowledge when things are just talking about gods? Talking about spirits? What is the invisible hand? Oh, the hand of an invisible, I don't know, spirit? God? Like, let's acknowledge what these things are. Just because we say something is secular does not mean it is not spiritual. We can look at sports. I mean, I love sports. Sports are amazing, but have you ever gone to a sports game and realized you're just at a tribal worship festival? Like, people are dressed up like the animal, you know, and the animal goes out and like the mascot and gets everyone's attention, and then the two teams come out. It's very Roman. They're going to fight in warfare. And oh, the houses of worship just branded all across the place, and on everyone, marks of their allegiance for their teams that give them the money. And the gambling. There's something like in the first year, almost $2 billion industry in the first year that it's legalized. The gambling. What are we doing? I mean, maybe you're allowed to gamble like $10 on a game of poker. Or maybe even as a society, it would be fine to believe that sports gambling is appropriate and morally good for us. But is sports gambling the multi-billion-dollar direction this society should be heading in when most people are struggling to pay their bills and a lot of them are in tents? Like, is now the time to introduce sports gambling to society? Should we be rewarded for the ways that we've been living? Is this the time to get alcohol into every corner store to celebrate the fact that nobody has a home? Like, what are we talking about? I know this sounds oppressive, and to some degree, to even hear what I'm describing and then to do your own internal mathematics, because all of you know certain industries more than I do, and could be a much sharper critic of the worlds that you know. And we are not going to feel okay at the end of this sermon unless we believe in God, because this world is not okay. This present situation is not okay. There is plenty to celebrate. There is more to be grateful for than to despair about. But let's not deceive ourselves. Things are not going well. To some degree, we have forgotten that whatever we give our attention to, at a fundamental level, that is what we worship. Our attention and our worship are synonymous. Jesus says, where your money is reveals where your heart is. And we have been giving money to tech companies who are extracting our information en masse and using it to summon an artificial intelligence that the head of Google has said is a technological god, has said in interviews. We are summoning a technological god with your data and your money. And the church didn't even notice. I know this sounds like old man yelling, but just like, can we just acknowledge that the world fundamentally changed in a decade and the church didn't even notice? We have devices in our pockets that are leading to this. And you know what the symbol is on most of them on the back? A bit apple. Hey, a bit apple is the symbol of the device that will extract knowledge at an undue time in order to subjugate us in death. I had someone say to me once, oh, I think that's a coincidence. Oh, really? You think the multi-million-dollar, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars advertising machine of the Macintosh company accidentally put a bit apple on the back of the device? Come on, Christians! And I have an iPhone. We can't be so defensive to not see the truth. Like, we have to see the truth, and then that will set us free, and then we can figure out what to do about it. But let's just acknowledge that it slipped in. We underestimated it. It came right in front of our eyes. It took our children. A whole generation sacrificed to these devices that we didn't even know what they were. It took a generation of children. And we're hearing about this now. Read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Quick summary that's come out recently. This is not even debatable to people paying attention. And I want to make sure that I name, around this point, that all the spirits are good. All the spirits were at least created good by God. Sport is good. I love sport. competition, the excitement, win, lose, the stakes of a game. Sport is good. Economy is good. How do we share in a public life with our resources? Politics is good and necessary. Entertainment is good. All of these things are good, but the spirits are only good if they're arranged properly under the living God. The spirits are only good if they participate in the flourishing of creation. And if the spirits begin to seek their own end, and if these new companies or houses of worship that we are building up to give attention to these ideas, these spirits, if they are crooked and bent, then the entire thing will become crooked and bent. The goal for us is not to destroy every business out there, is not to destroy politics, and is not to destroy the economy. Our hope as Christians is to preserve what life is left in them and to call them in allegiance back to the God who is God, who as Christians we would say has revealed God's self in the person of Jesus. We need to call them back to their proper place, and we need to call out where we see corrupt houses of worship stealing our humanity. All right, I'm almost done. There was an article a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times. It had like a very New York Times sounding headline. It was like the last frontier of the internet. It was very ambitious. But the New York Post ran a version of the New York Times article, and it had like a really good classic New York Post headline, which cut to the chase and was just, remote Amazon tribe connects to internet only to wind up hooked on porn, social media. How's that for a headline? Remote Amazon tribe finally gets connected to the Twitter guy's spaceship up in the sky that blasts the messaging down to the whole world from his star in the skies, in the heavens, you could say. And once it reaches the people, its quickest manifestation is that the young people are addicted to social media, and they've begun to share pornography amongst each other. And the Twitter guy even went online to say, no, they're not addicted to pornography. Like as if it was like, we need to debate what addiction means when the remote Amazon tribe starts looking at pornography all day. Like it's just a wild line to start arguing on. Some of the quotes from in the article about how it was affecting their way of life and destroying their community. Someone said, everyone is so connected that sometimes they don't even talk to their own family. This is a tribe of 2,000 people who all share the same last name because they're so tribally connected for so many generations. Another line was, some young people maintain our traditions. Others just want to spend the whole afternoon on their phones. So they've limited it now in this tribe. They can only go on the internet and on their phones for 2 hours in the morning, 5 hours in the evening, and all day on Sunday. Now, either I am indeed what I fear, an old, out-of-touch man with nothing relevant to say on the topics, and so I've cherry-picked an article that speaks to the ends I want to yell about, or a remote Amazon tribe being hooked up to the internet is like a perfect petri dish to recognize the waters we've been swimming in that have been getting hotter and hotter without us noticing. We're like lobsters, every generation in the water saying, yeah, they complained about it getting hotter last time too. Like my parents were saying it was getting hotter. It just always feels like it's getting hotter, but it's not a big deal. Maybe it is a big deal. 30, 40 years ago, every young man was not addicted to internet pornography. And today, arguably, that might be the case, or at least the norm. 30, 40 years ago, there was a little more space between the radical different worldviews that people held. A little more space for connection with neighbors. And that is eroding. It seems like what has happened in this tribe has been happening to all of us for a long time, but either we couldn't recognize it or we felt too uncomfortable to say something about it. Maybe we were afraid that somebody would hear our criticism of the institution as an offense against them as a person. But we're not trying to offend people. We're trying to offend spirits. We're trying to go on the offense in a sort of sportsman-like way against our enemy, the adversary, because there is an adversary, lest we forget. And we've spent a lot of time on our back foot, and it has led us to be humbled as the church. And I think it's a very good thing that we've been humbled as the church. We probably needed to not be in power for a while. We needed to have some of our sins uncovered and our corruption exposed so that we could get into a posture of repentance. And now we've been sorry for a while. And it's time to shift onto our front foot. And for some of us, this is going to be a big stretch, and it might even feel too far away to shift to seeing everything as spiritual. But I tell you who's going to see it more clearly. The next generation. Even just running youth Bible study in this congregation, I can see how these young people, they're not going to have a better lifestyle than their parents. And in some cases, their parents haven't had as good a lifestyle as their parents. They recognize that this myth of Western secular society being a place of flourishing, they recognize that's coming to an end. They're seeing what these devices and these other houses of worship are doing to us. And they are looking to us, and not just to their parents, but to all of us. Sometimes, especially to those who are not their parents, they are looking to you to tell them what this is. They are looking to you to show them a better way. And if we, each one of us personally, does not pick up the responsibility of these times, they will not be equipped to face down this suicidal world. To quote Kendrick Lamar, we need to be waking them up and telling them to pray and giving them tools to walk through life like day to day, teaching them morals, integrity, discipline, speaking the truth, and considering what God's considering. The internet doesn't know nothing about that. Doesn't know nothing about that. It extracts, it pacifies, it takes and takes and takes, but we can give and give and bless and bless and serve and serve. When it comes to the wider church, I have no idea what they should do. When it comes to the church in America, I've been ignoring it for 5 years, and I plan on never looking at it again. It's just too big, it's too bloated. But when it comes to Canada, Ontario, Hamilton, the actual Christians we meet here, when it comes to the global communion of the saints, I think that we have repented and we have been sorry, and I don't really want to hear us say sorry no more. I'm kind of done with it. We've apologized, we've repented, we meant it, we mean it, and we are not sorry anymore. In a world where half the animals are now endangered because of the changes to the world driven by the economy, we are not sorry. In light of a culture that has been consumed by technology and has been turned into anxious and fearful children, we are not sorry. I feel like it is time for us to shift onto our front foot and speak the truth in full honesty and humility about who we are and what is happening right now. We can stay on the defensive as long as we want, but we all know the old saying, the best defense is a good Amen.